In today's era of creative stagnation in the gaming industry, every time a remake gets announced, I find myself asking, why does this need to exist? It's a question worth asking, because without it, you risk becoming a mindless, bugman, soy-sipping, product-consuming golem, forgetting that video games are, at their core, an art form. If you're going to remake a game, if you're going to touch something that was already complete, there has to be a good reason to do so. So what is that reason? Is it because the graphics are just too outdated to hold up on modern consoles? Is it because the controls feel clunky, designed for a different era of gaming? Or maybe it's because the last entry came out so long ago that the old fans have moved on and now the franchise needs a brand new generation of players. Whatever the reason is, a remake should exist with purpose, not just for nostalgia, and definitely not just for being a cash grab. Metal Gear Solid Delta is a game that fails to answer any of those questions in a convincing manner. It shouldn't and wouldn't exist if it wasn't because of the simple fact that these slop remakes make a ton of money. And who buys them? Glue eater console players and balding 30-something-year-old man-children who yearn for a sip of nostalgia because they want to forget about their miserable, worthless lives, about the fact that they will never own a house or have a wife and children and live happy a day of their lives. This game is a soulless piece of trash that runs like dog shit, and nobody who has a soul, who wants these shitty practices to be weeded out of gaming, should buy them. Except me, of course, since I very legally acquired a copy of this game to review. So, without further ado, here's Metal Gear Solid Delta. First of all, I have to talk about the most egregious thing about this game, which is the performance. And of course, it's made on Unreal Engine 5, who would have guessed? It's so infuriating that in the year of our Lord 2025, we can't have a game that won't shit the bed when there's more than 3 enemies on the screen, or an explosion happens, and your frame rate wouldn't dip in half. I had to put the game on low settings and use performance DLSS, basically upscaling from less than 1080p to 1440p. 4 years ago, when I built my PC, I could play almost everything on high settings native. Cyberpunk runs perfectly. Metal Gear Solid 5, which is a far more complex and also good-looking game than this, I get over 100 FPS over there on highest settings. And looking at Steam hardware surveys, my build is actually quite above average nowadays. So most people playing this game are going to have a very bad time with the performance. And it's of course because this is another game that can be categorized as the Unreal Engine 5 slop remake type. It's basically just the old game wrapped in a shiny new engine. Lowest effort possible, usually outsourced to India or some other third world country, similar to the Dead Rising Deluxe Remastered and the Oblivion Remastered. We all saw what broken, soulless disasters those were. Now I have to admit, the quality of this is a tiny bit higher than those examples, partly because the original game was already ahead of its time and also quite polished around the edges, so they already had high quality material to work with, like with the motion capture data, gun models, characters, etc. But in the end, that doesn't change the fact that it's made in UE5, which means optimization is abysmal. I mean, like, why is it that game optimization has only been going backwards? Like, this game was made on the PS2 for fuck's sake. Back then, they split it across multiple maps just to make it possible to run on the hardware. And in the remake, the game functions exactly the same way. You have to go through all the loading screens, even all the tiny maps that they could have possibly stitched together. They're all here. All the loading screens are there, all the loading zones are there. Sometimes you just walk for 10 seconds and the other map loads. And even then, in some of these maps, you get stutters. Meanwhile, the original ran perfectly on the PS2. It hit the standard resolution of the time and kept a stable frame rate. 480i interlaced at the time with the CRT screens, and a locked 30 FPS, the conventional resolution and the conventional accepted frame rate for a video game at the time. By the way, Metal Gear Solid 2 even managed 60 FPS, and it came out in 2001. Both games performed exactly as they should have relative to their era. Now compare that to today. The standard apparently is, as they told us, the industry themselves, is that they told us we should expect around 4K 120 FPS. And it's written on every single PS5 packaging, but is that what you get from any of the games that are made for the PS5? No, of course not. There's not a single game, I guess maybe Astrobot, where you can play at 4K and 120 FPS. And even then, it has to be upscaled to 4K. And soon, we're going to see frame generation also. So we're probably going to frame gen from 60 to 120. So what happens when games don't actually run at the resolution that they should, and you generate fake frames on top of them, is that what you get is going to be a smeared artificial resolution where the moment you move the camera, everything just turns into a blurry mess. Basically on the PS5, this game runs at under 720p and doesn't even manage to get 60 FPS most of the time. Isn't that insane? And has consistent drops and hiccups. And even on PC, you'd think throwing money at the problem would solve it, right? You can have the craziest build, spend $10,000, and buy a 5090. But no, even then, you have the most extreme setup possible. You will still get stutters and frame drops. And to make the matter worse, it's locked to 60 FPS, yes. So it stutters and drops frame on a 50-fucking-90 at 60 FPS. It goes down to 59, 58. How was this allowed to be made in 2025? And just to put things in perspective about how much more powerful modern hardware is compared to the PS2, I made this chart. On the PlayStation 2, you had around 6 gigaflops of computing power. Fast forward to PS5, and now you see that it's about 10 teraflops. That's an increase of 1.6 million%. Now, does this feel like a 1.6 million% upgrade? Look at the games, look at how they run. Does it really feel like that much of a progress in quality or performance of video games? I do not believe so. And the average PC today also has similar specs to a PS5, a bit beefier. For example, a 3060, which according to Steam statistics, is what a lot of people who are watching this video probably have, and a lot of people who would buy this game also would have. That's already in the ballpark of PS5 performance, maybe a bit better. But then compare that to a 5090. And imagine, this game has hiccups and performance drops on that hardware. Think about it, the 5090 is over 16 million% more powerful than the PS2. It's 10 times more powerful than your PC. Can anyone honestly tell me that Metal Gear Solid Delta looks or plays 16 million times better than the original? It's insane how bad game optimization has gotten since the PS2 era. Back then, at least one good thing about the console-dominated market was consistency. Everyone played on the same hardware, with the same controls, and the developers knew exactly what experience players would have. Image quality, frame rate, responsiveness, it was all uniform, so you knew what you were buying into. Nowadays, experiences of different gamers about the same game are widely different, depending on how powerful their hardware is, obviously whether they are on PC or console, and in fact within PC, there is the biggest discrepancy from the lower end builds to the higher end builds. This level of discrepancy is ridiculous. When you're selling a product, the customer should know what they're buying into. There is an industry standard margin of error that if a product you buy exceeds that, you can take legal action against that company and you get your money refunded. But in gaming, the variance we see in games today would never be acceptable in any other industry. Imagine if McDonald's ran like the modern gaming industry. You'd buy a Big Mac at one location, and it's the standard McDonald's product you'd expect. It's just Goy slop, as always. Then you walk a mile down the road, and you see a stand with the golden arches on it, and they sell diarrhea in a bun, Indian street food style. That would destroy the brand overnight. Because as a customer, why would you risk it? If every time you went to McDonald's, it was a gamble between getting normal food or getting diarrhea, why would you even risk it? That's exactly what buying a modern game feels like. Every purchase is like spinning the roulette wheel. Will it run well on my hardware, or will it be a stuttery mess? Will it actually be fun, or will it be broken at lunch? And you can't even trust the listed minimum or recommended specs anymore, because they simply lie about it nowadays with DLSS and frame generation and all this BS. They can get away with not doing any optimization to their games and still shipping them on time. I honestly think one of the biggest reasons modern games run so terribly is the way PC graphics settings and presets work. On the surface, it sounds great. You can fine-tune everything, turn things on or off, and optimize your game. But in reality, this flexibility has given shitty devs a free pass to shove experimental tech into their games, advertise them as ultra quality, and mislead players with trailers that are run on graphic settings that no average machine can actually run. The best example of this is ray tracing. Ray tracing is the biggest scam in gaming right now. Every trailer you see is captured with ray tracing maxed out on a monster PC with a $2,000 GPU. So you, the average consumer, think, oh, that's how it's going to look on my PS5. But when you boot it up, psych. You play at 30 FPS upscaled from 720p with no ray tracing at all because your hardware really can't handle it. That's the average UE5 experience right now. Ultra settings, ray tracing, and all that, let's be honest, it's just marketing for Nvidia. Those options only exist for people who can afford GPUs in the $2,000 bracket. And yeah, that's insane to say. We now have a GPU price tier that starts at $1,000 and goes higher than that. Why even include ultra preset settings in a game if 99% of players can't use them? All it does is bloat the install size of the game with all the ultra texture packs and assets that you'll never see. And that's why modern games are all over 100 gigs now. Same with this game, by the way. Like, how did they even manage to bloat the game size this much? Most of the game looks pretty much the same, like the areas. There isn't even that much of a difference between different environments or enemy types in this game. You're mostly in the same swamp/jungle area and some interiors. MGS5, which is a game 10 times better than this, in my opinion. Which is the correct opinion, by the way. It looks 10 times better than this soulless crap, and the game is right under 30 gigs. 1/3 of the size. It's absurd. You can't even fit most modern games on a single Blu-ray disc anymore, which is part of the reason why physical games are basically dead. And here's where my conspiracy theory comes in. I think Nvidia is deliberately making sure modern games run poorly. They've shifted their focus away from gamers towards AI, which is where the real money is. But they still want to maintain dominance in the gaming GPU market. And why, you might ask, is because it gives them leverage. They can go to developers and say, most of your customers already use Nvidia, our product. Build your games around our tech. Add ray tracing, add a DLSS. Make the game in Unreal Engine 5. Make sure these games are borderline unplayable unless you own a high-end GPU. The point isn't that everyone will eventually get a 5090 level performance GPU. Quite the opposite, in fact. Nvidia doesn't want that parity of gaming experiences because they know it's impossible economically. They want a permanent performance cap so that the $2,000 cards look worth it for the few people who can afford them. Meanwhile, the pleb tier cards, the 50 and 60 series, are stripped down every generation. You get fewer cores, less VRAM, worse performance in the older models, and they only exist to keep their market share. Nvidia doesn't care if you buy them. They barely make any money on those anyways. All the real profit comes from the high-end cards now, and increasingly from AI-only cards. The 4090 and 5090, for example, are so powerful that the US government literally banned them from being sold to China, because they can use them to run sophisticated AI models. So yeah, NVIDIA's entire strategy is to funnel the best silicon into AI and into high-margin GPUs, while average gamers get whatever scraps are left. There's a drought from the lower end to even to mid-high-end gaming hardware, and what's happening is basically predictive programming. It's to make people understand it is what it is. You have to get used to lower frames and using DLSS and using FrameGen. And devs play along, stuffing their games full of experimental tech that makes them unplayable on anything but the highest end cards. And what's the result? We're left with bloated, broken games that barely run on the hardware most people actually own. So finally, let's talk about the visuals. And this is where we hit the big question of soullessness. The best word I can use to describe this game is anachronistic. There's something about the way the visuals are layered over the old motion capture data that it just doesn't fit. It doesn't click. The whole thing ends up sitting in this uncanny valley, and it's especially obvious in certain cutscenes. Take the scene where the boss destroys this plane, for example. It just looks off. Like do you see how it looks like worse than a PS2 animation for some reason, but it looks better in the actual PS2 game. Again, in some places it's fine, some cutscenes are totally fine, but in others, it's so obviously bad and cheap looking, and it's all because of the fact that graphics don't match the animations. They clash, and that mismatch makes everything feel cheap. This is where so much of the PS2 era artistic direction and charm gets thrown out of the window, all in the name of the realism that UE5 provides. At first, I couldn't really put my finger on what was wrong. It's one of those things that's hard to explain until I watched this Thread Interactive video while editing, and yeah, he explains it perfectly. It's actually the lighting that's hitting the characters in the wrong ways, where you don't expect it. And it causes your brain to send some signals about something is wrong and telling you that this is fake, what you're looking at is fake. MGS5's lighting, despite the fact that it came out over 10 years ago, is still so much better than this. In fact, the lighting in MGS5 is a huge part of the game's art direction, the bloom effect, which is like a memed part of the game. For example, when a truck or a tank is coming towards you, it shines on the horizon, or the searchlights hit you as you enter an outpost at night. I don't know exactly what it's called, but it's something I've only seen in this game, and it just makes everything look so much more dramatic. Or even when you step outside from an interior and sunlight hits you in the face, it's almost like over the top. You get overwhelmed by all the light around you, light hitting your retina. It's not exactly realistic, but it's a rule of cool kind of thing. It makes the scenery, again, as I said, more dramatic and intense. But in Delta, the way the light hits, for example, different materials, it flattens everything. Wood, metal, concrete, it all ends up looking like the same material. I don't know how else to put it, but your brain just doesn't want to believe that it's real. It feels fake, and you get this uncanny valley feeling all the time. And this is where the whole soullessness argument comes in. These new devs had no clue what the original presentation was meant to convey, or the ideas behind it. They completely butchered a lot of the emotional cutscenes, which relied on specific lighting, by slapping on this generic UE5 lighting instead. And it also ruins the campiness of the game. There's a thin line between a well-executed campy joke and just pure cringe. And this game has some good moments that are very campy, B-movie-esque. But in the remake, again, because of the lack of the original art direction and it being changed into this modern slop, the campiness is gone, and instead it's just cringe. It's actually crazy. It feels better in the original, the delivery of the jokes, like in this scene where Ocelot mews. Again, it's considerably cringe even for the time, but still feels more awkward and misplaced in the remake because of the more realistic graphics. The juxtaposition between the massive effort poured into the original and the sheer lack of effort in the remake is exactly what makes it feel soulless. You've probably seen the video Cropecat made about the Oblivion Remake. He didn't even need to add commentary or compare the new slop game to the old. He just showed the interviews of the old devs obsessing over every little detail on how green the grass should be, basically showing how they crafted the game with pure passion. That alone said everything. That's the difference. What we're seeing now is companies taking genuine works of art, projects born out of passion, and handing them off to opportunistic devs, often with less skill and less understanding of the original material. And these remakes aren't about respect or preserving the art style, they're about commercialization. And all they can do really is to butcher the original. It's like taking a paintbrush to the Mona Lisa to improve it. These people cannot create anything new. They can only destroy. The least offensive thing about the visuals in this game is the character models and the new faces. They're mostly fine, again, besides Ocelot, which looks weirdly angular, I guess. But, of course, it wouldn't be a modern remake without at least some censorship. Now, to be fair, this one has less censorship compared to the other recent remakes. That's partly because Konami marketed it as a faithful remake. But here's my little conspiracy. The faithfulness isn't because they actually care about the original vision. It's because that's the only way they could sneak it past modern sensibility filters. And that's why the second you boot up the game, you get this little pop-up, basically a trigger warning, saying that the game's artistic impression is outdated. But they still included everything for the sake of history. Wow, so stunning and brave, guys. Do you honestly think the people who worked on this remake gave a single flying fuck about Kojima's original vision? Of course not. If they had it their way, they would have gutted it. The only reason they didn't is because Konami at top level knows that wouldn't sell and stopped them from doing so. They've seen what happens in the past 10 plus years of woke games flopping, so they didn't do it out of respect for the original game. They did it out of fear of the gamer. La heckin' chuds would boycott our game, so we better not mess with them. And yet, there are still changes, tiny ones but noticeable, to the chud's eye, of course. Notably, the smut is kind of toned down. It's still there for the fellow gooners out there, but some of the posters are different. Again, maybe some of this is because they lost licensing to certain images. Sure, but the truth is, we'll never really know, and the chuds would never give these companies the benefit of the doubt when it comes to smut censorship. Another case is something that I didn't even notice, even in the original. This one is for the professional gooners out there who noticed that in the X-ray scene with Eva, when you're treating her later in the game, there used to be nipples, which is interesting. Kind of an X-ray that shows them, but yeah, now they're gone in the remake. Now, I don't even know what to think about this, but here's the point. If it doesn't matter, why did they bother with changing it? After all, it's a faithful remake. With all the belts and whistles, as all the shills have been saying in the past couple of days, it's supposed to be faithful to the original, to the teeth, right? Clearly it mattered to someone, probably some overpaid sensitivity consultant. Yes, that's a real position in the gaming industry now, by the way. Some gender ambiguous obese creature from Sweet Baby Inc. or something like that saw a problem with this and had it removed. And again, as I said, they could have done more. They could have gotten away with more if it wasn't for Konami stating that this is going to be a quote-unquote faithful remake. And this is where you really see the drop in standards for video games in recent years. People have been beaten down so much that as long as a game isn't explicitly shoving gender ideology in your face, they'll accept it as fine. That's where we are now. The bar has been set so low that people look at this remake and say, well, at least not woke, as if that's some kind of an achievement. And honestly, I don't even care if the game is kind of woke, but at least it's fun. At least it's well made. It has a soul, it has a direction. That's what really matters. And here I segue into the gameplay section. The first thing you'll notice is that Snake's animations are practically copy-pasted from Venom in MGS5, but there's this weird compromise. You can't do everything Venom could do in MGS5. For example, in MGS5, when you're crawling, you could punch enemies to make them fall. You can't do that in Delta. The iconic rolling around in MGS5, you can't do that either. It was kind of broken in the original, but it was really fun using the movement tech, if you want to call it that. It allowed for a certain skill expression if you're going with creative kills, but I'm not going to hold that against this game, because obviously it wasn't in the original. But here's the thing, they already went out of their way to add so many elements from MGS5, making it almost one-to-one, that in itself already makes the game pretty easy, so why not go the extra mile and add more of these cool movement options and tech? I don't know, it just seems a weird decision to me. I also noticed that when you're prone and want to shoot behind you, there's this new rolling on your stomach animation, again, copy-pasted from MGS5. But here's the weird part. Because the original rolling mechanic isn't in the game, it's not really possible to move side to side when you're prone. In the original, you could just spin 360 degrees on your stomach and move in any direction while prone. Obviously, not really realistic, but in Delta, you can't do that. And all of this is available in the new control scheme settings. You can actually pick between two styles. One for the Legacy, which plays not really exactly the same, of course, because of the PS2 pressure-sensitive buttons. They have switched that into a better system than what was before the compromise for Xbox controllers, with the pressing left stick to change the modes between aiming and not aiming, like the different pressure levels that would be on a pressure-sensitive controller. But I, of course, went with the modernized controls because I wanted to use the mouse and keyboard setup. That's honestly what I wanted most out of this remake, because the PC port in the so-called Master Collection basically didn't have that. It was just a joystick emulator, but of course they gatekept it for this remake, and I wanted to try it out. Since as someone who mostly plays on PC nowadays, I really fumble on the controller when it comes to aiming. But then I immediately realized what a monkey's paw wish it was. Playing with mouse and keyboard makes the game way too easy. You can just trivialize every encounter. They've tried to balance it a bit with bullet drop on the tranquilizer pistol. The other guns don't have drops, so you can still snipe with them, basically. But if you're going for high ranks or no-kill runs, you're basically going to only use the tranq gun most of the time, which has noticeable bullet drop and a little bit of spread, especially at longer ranges. It was a bit infuriating at first, but I get why they did it. Otherwise, it would have been even easier, and it's already much easier compared to the original. I played on hard on my first playthrough, and it was a walk in the park. And here's where I really wished this had been more of a reimagination rather than a one-to-one remake. We still have the same enemies with almost identical AI and the same tiny maps that were designed that way because of PS2 limitations. I wish they'd at least added more enemies or modified the maps a bit, hide some line of sights, block some of the cheesy spots where you can just snipe everything. That would have made it feel more balanced and challenging with the new controller schemes. But no, they didn't do any of that, and I know it's not about preserving the original, it's just laziness. They just didn't care about anyone who was going to play this game for a challenge, and I know that as a fact because of what I noticed in my second playthrough, as I wanted to play on Extreme and get the Foxhound rank. Now, let me give a quick history lesson for those who don't know. There was a time in gaming when hard didn't mean a game belonged to a specific genre. It wasn't just Souls-like that was supposed to be difficult, and every other game was a brain-dead, numbing experience that had accessibility features so all the 5 disabled black trans woman gamers could beat the game and feel good about themselves. And Metal Gear Solid series is one of those games that was known to be hard. It was notoriously one of the franchises that didn't give a fuck if you would just stop trying and put down the controller after 20 minutes if you couldn't progress. And it's not like a Souls-like game where you can just beat your head against the wall and you'll eventually come to beat the boss with high enough stats and just pressing dodge button at the right time. No. In this game, if you try to beat your head against the wall, the game only gets harder. You actually have to be smart to maneuver through the levels and go through the enemies. The bosses themselves in these games, they're quite easy. Especially in MGS3, you can cheese most of them quite easily. It's the whole game, the journey, that is the challenge. And that's why there's so many challenge runs that you can do in this game. And the game acknowledges them through different ranks that you can get. One of the more prestigious ones is the Foxhound rank. And why do I bring this up? Because despite all these ranks and challenges still being in the game, the requirements to get them have been made so much easier. And that's besides the fact that how much of it is already easier, like the game in general, because of the gameplay changes and being able to aim with your mouse. And the real big problem is the autosaves at the start of every level. They practically trivialize the whole game and completely ignore one of the original requirements of the Foxhound rank, where when you were limited to 25 saves or less for the entire playthrough, now you don't even need to save manually. You can just reload and autosave and it still counts. Again, they could have just added a check, but it wouldn't count the autosaves. But they either were too lazy or just wanted to make the game easier. Now, I get it, for more casual playthroughs, the autosave feature is actually quite good in the original. If you got spotted and wanted a clean playthrough, you basically had to wait to die, then press continue, and there was no autosave. And you had to do so much menuing just to get out of the game and then load a save that you had. Now, these autosaves and the ability to save and load so quickly, they are useful quality of life features, don't get me wrong, but they also inevitably trivialize the game. That friction existed in the original for a reason. It forced you to learn, adapt, and cope with situations when you got caught, so that not everyone would immediately reload a save to do everything perfectly. The challenge was part of the design. So now that that's gone, you're no longer punished for your mistakes. You can just reload an autosave and continue with almost no loss on progress. The game no longer teaches you to adapt, it just lets you brute force your way through. Now, in the end, I should mention also that there were 2 minigames in the original PS2 release of Metal Gear Solid 3 that were missing in both 2011 HD Collection and, as a result, also in Master Collection that came out a couple of years ago, since it was just a repackaging of the HD Collection. But they took their time to add those minigames back to this game. One of them is the Apescape crossover, which at this point is basically just Sony dangling their dead franchises that they're never going to do anything about them in front of your eyes. And the other one is the Guy Savage minigame, as it's called. In the original, Snake has a nightmare and then he gets transported into a Devil May Cry style hack and slash sequence. It's a tiny bit of gameplay there. It was memorable in the original, and I really liked it. In fact, here it was a nice surprise to see. At least this is one of the points of detail they did not brush off, and they bothered to include. I mean, after all, it would have been even more of a controversy if they wouldn't have included them into this, what's supposed to be the definitive version of Metal Gear Solid 3, so the devs probably knew fans would complain about their absence, and rightly so. Putting aside all the soullessness and trivialization of the game, it makes me think about what we could have gotten from this franchise instead. As a fan, I can't help but lament the opportunity cost. I mean, if you're going to make any Metal Gear game, or if you're going to make a remake, why not remake the original 2D NES titles, Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake? Those are practically begging for a remake. They actually contain really important parts of the plot that most fans don't even know about. Even die-hard players who've gone through most of the series missed the lore. That's part of why the whole Ishmael and Venom reveal in MGS5 was so mind-blowing, because hardly anyone played the original games, where you literally kill Big Boss's clone in the first one and then he appears again in the second game. And that's the perfect reason to revisit them, and they would follow MGS5's story, so you can tie up the loose ends there. Now, here's the challenge. Those games don't have much going on for them beyond the story, so a remake wouldn't just be a remake, it would basically be a brand new game built from the ground up. The level design, controls, graphics, the character designs, everything is outdated. You would have to reinvent it all, reimagine the entire thing, while staying faithful to the original story. And yes, that means actually spending money, putting in the work, and, you know, doing the thing that video game companies do, make a new game, right? Crazy idea. And there's so much potential here. Imagine a remake where you play as both Venom and Solid, and for the final boss you can even switch between them. That would be so meta, like totally something Kojima would do. Fans have already made source filmmaker videos showing how it would play out. The ideas are there, they're just waiting to be used. This is honestly depressing to know, no matter how well this remake does, which is not doing really well compared to the other remakes that came out. Oblivion Remastered, for example, had way more players on day one and continuing to the first couple of days compared to MGS Delta, which hovers around 15k, 20k concurrent players. But again, let's say whatever those sale numbers are on console also, whether it sold well or it bombed, it's not going to end well for the franchise. The jury is divided already, almost 50-50 on the hate and like for this game. But with these things, as we've seen, the negative side usually wins out over time. When the hype fades away, the novelty wears off, and the cracks start to show. It's the same pattern we saw with the Silent Hill 2 remake, also. And eventually even the shills will admit it. And that's a sad reality. The franchise is stuck in a deadlock, and the worst part is, we're never going to see a real conclusion at this point. Kojima is fucking playing with his balls, making his autistic Amazon Delivery Boy Simulator franchise. I don't know when he hit his head against the wall and he thinks being a soulless veggie moving around packages is appealing to gamers now. I think he lost his way and went insane when Konami took Metal Gear, his masterpiece, his child, away from him, and now he doesn't know what to do. Dude, just give this man back his game. Give this autistic genius his autism-fueled geopolitics simulator back. Let him wrap up the saga properly before he dies. He's like 65 already. He's not going to live forever. And if nothing changes, Metal Gear will never get a real bookend, and that's the tragedy of all of this. So that was my thoughts on Metal Gear Solid Delta. It was longer than my usual rant, but it is what it is. If you liked it, like it. If you didn't, dislike, and bye!